All right, hey everybody, this is Mr. Cross coming at you. We're going to talk about narcotics, stimulants, and depressants today. Those are three classifications of drugs. We're going to start off with what are narcotics. Narcotics are specific drugs that are obtained only by prescription, are usually used to relieve pain. Um, Historically, they're made from the opium plant, which is a liquid, which they extract the liquid from the poppy plant, and they contain the substances that numb the body. All right. Highly addictive. All right, highly addictive. So, narcotics and addiction. Well, first of all, narcotics can produce what's called euphoria. Euphoria is this feeling of well being or elation. Usually, people describe it as a high feeling. So, it's affecting those parts of the brain that perceive it as pleasurable. And so, it dumps a bunch of pleasurable chemicals into your brain, and that's why you get that intense high feeling from it. The part that's the problematic is the addiction part of it. The body becomes so accustomed to having the drug when it's taken away, the user doesn't get those pleasurable chemicals being flooded into their brain, and so they're struggling. They go through this withdrawal symptoms. They go through withdrawal symptoms, and we've talked about this before with tobacco and alcohol. With chronic use, the drug is reduced. When the drug is reduced or stopped, the symptoms of withdrawal start to appear, and some of those can be extremely unbearable. Um, Usually, when we're talking about drugs like meth and opioids, I mean that's when people are really having a hard time even just functioning on a daily basis. They got pains in their muscles and their bones. They're having problems with sleeplessness. They become extremely agitated, and then diarrhea and vomiting are really common withdrawal symptoms as well when going off the drug. So heroin, we don't see heroin. We didn't see heroin here very much when I first got to Elk River. We saw meth. Meth was kind of the big thing, which we'll talk about in a little while. But if we did see heroin, typically it was this black tar heroin stuff. And because now heroin has gotten a lot more pure, and for reasons so that people don't have to inject it, they can smoke it. That's typically why the heroin has gotten better. People still do inject, the white stuff, and but they're also able to smoke it, which a lot of people find to be better because they don't have to worry about HIV and hepatitis and whatnot. Most of the heroin usually we used to get from Mexico, and now we're seeing it coming from like the western part of the United States, uh, Wyoming, Montana, those areas. We're seeing a lot more coming from that area. And the one thing about heroin, it is probably one of the most addictive drugs that you can take. Extremely hard to get off of this. Many people have to actually go on a drug called methadone to get off of it, and so they struggle with that quite a bit. All right, so oxy, also commonly talked about as far as being an opioid. Oxycontin and oxycodone are very similar to that of heroin, the drug itself. There's just a couple different chemicals that they are. Oxycontin and oxycodone, one of them is the the fast release, and then one of them is kind of the more long term. But if you think about it, I mean, first of all, it's a legal narcotic, and this is what we're really struggling with right now in our own town, is that we're seeing lots of kids becoming addicted to these types of drugs. Used legally, they can control severe pains, and lots of you probably have parents or grandparents that have been prescribed it. If you've ever had surgery, a lot of times they prescribe this as a pain medication, but they're super abused. And like we talked about, with heroin, the narcotic side effect or withdrawal effects are just really, really not a good thing. So I'm going to show you a quick video. Y'all know who Prince was. Prince passed away from an opioid overdose
Today, the
called
autopsy
fentanyl.
report for Prince revealed that he died of an opioid overdose. Prince was found dead 6 weeks ago in his home outside Minneapolis, and Jamie Yukas is there.
The medical examiner's report says Prince died from fentanyl toxicity, that it was self-administered, and his death was an accident. Fentanyl is an opioid pain medication, usually prescribed for chronic pain for patients who have grown tolerant to other pain medications. Doctors say it's 30 to 50 times more potent than heroin. The last 3 weeks of the singer's life were evidence of an addiction spiraling downhill. On the day Prince canceled an Atlanta concert for health reasons, he spent the day with Minnesota doctor Michael Todd Schulenberg, undergoing tests. A week later, after a makeup performance, Prince's plane made an emergency landing. He had to be treated at a hospital. The day before Prince died, members of Prince's inner circle initiated an intervention, getting the help of prominent California addiction doctor Howard Kornfeld. The next morning, Prince was found unconscious in an elevator at his Paisley Park home by his state staff and Kornfeld's son Andrew, who had taken a red-eye to begin the recovery process. Kornfeld was carrying a supply of opioid addiction treatment pills. The Kornfeld's attorney, William Mozzie, explained the son's role last month.
Andrew's purpose in being there was to describe the Recovery Without Walls program, to familiarize Prince with that. Prince could go there for pain management and any addiction issues.
Since Prince's death, investigators, including the Drug Enforcement Administration, have focused on the singer's use of the painkillers and how he got them. Now that we know how Prince died, authorities will have to determine if criminal charges should be filed. And Scott, Prince's estate still needs to be sorted out. The next hearing in that case is June 27th.
All right, so kind of sad, here's a guy who's coming from Minnesota who's extremely talented, and obviously life is snuffed out early due to the problem with the opioid addiction. All right, what are stimulants? Stimulants are drugs that speed up the activity in the human brain and spinal cord. We talked a little bit about this with with nicotine and caffeine, as far as just that whole speeding up process. Some patients can be prescribed stimulants with certain physical or emotional problems. ADHD or ADD people, kids who are suffering from that, will actually be given a stimulant to help calm down the central nervous system, which is kind of an interesting aspect, which I don't have time to go into, but that's kind of a weird thing. They give them a stimulant to try to get them to their brains to slow down a little bit. All right, so amphetamines, also known as speeds, drugs that speed up the central nervous system. They're highly addictive, can cause aggressive and behavior, weight loss, and loss of physical strength. One of the main ones is cocaine, as far as an illegal drug is concerned. Illegal stimulants derived from the cocoa plant, usually sold as a white powder, but can be mixed with water and injected intravenously. So again, these are going to be injected. Can also be smoked or inhaled. It's sometimes called freebasing. And again, it's that pure white looking substance. It looks sort of like heroin, but it's just a little bit different. The one thing about cocaine that's bad is that it's so short term, typically lasting between 15 and 20 minutes, and then people start to suffer from withdrawal symptoms after those 15 or 20 minutes. It is one of the most addictive drugs on the street again today, and it's super expensive. You don't see a lot of it with people. Cocaine itself, we see some crack that is a lot cheaper and is used by a lot of different people. So what are some of the effects of cocaine? It's almost immediately. The effects can last a few hours, but they get to the point where they start to go to withdrawal symptoms pretty quickly. Can lead to violent and unpredictable behavior. Users can go on a cocaine binge when a drug is taken repeatedly and act increasingly high. It's kind of showing the money that's surrounding some of that too. A lot of people get themselves in a lot of trouble because cocaine is extremely expensive. As far as crack is concerned, crack cocaine, it's a smokable form, and it's like I said, it's called freebasing. Usually, it's a little bit of a lesser grade or not very good cocaine, and that's why they're able to do some of that. and it's pretty cheap. So I'll show you a quick video on that.
In the words of music legend Whitney Houston,
crack is whack.
But with all the extra attention lately, thanks to Toronto Mayor Rob Ford, what exactly is crack cocaine? Is it really as whack as it's portrayed to be? Crack is simply another form of cocaine which comes from the leaves of a coca plant. After mixing powdered cocaine with a weak base such as baking soda, it changes composition and a solid is produced, often referred to as rocks. This solid has a much lower melting point than cocaine, allowing it to be smoked as opposed to snorted. In fact, it's called crack because of the sound it makes when heated. But why smoke it? Well, the lungs are an extremely quick and effective way of getting something into the bloodstream. Those with asthma, for example, use inhalers to quickly put a drug directly into their system. When smoke meets the large surface area in your lungs, it too slips right through the membrane and heads straight to your brain in as little as 8 seconds. This is much faster and more intense than the effects of snorted cocaine, which generally takes around 10 minutes to reach the brain. However, once in the brain, crack and cocaine are effectively identical. Initially, users feel energized, alert, and much more aware of their senses. In the brain, crack acts on the ventral tegmental area, releasing large amounts of dopamine, the chemical often associated with feelings of pleasure and euphoria. This dopamine travels between brain cells, called neurons, and binds to receptors that trigger the good feelings. Now, normally, this dopamine would be reabsorbed back into the neuron by a dopamine transporter. However, crack alters this process. It attaches to the transporter and blocks the reabsorption, allowing dopamine to build up and continually stimulate the receptors. As a result, you feel, well, really good for about 10 minutes. But soon after, the dopamine levels in the brain plummet, causing an extreme low and often feelings of depression, which is why many users typically smoke more, hoping to reach that high again. Unfortunately, these dopamine levels can take a long time to naturally replenish, contributing to physical and psychological dependence or addiction, as well as increased irritability, restlessness, and paranoia. In some cases, crack or cocaine abuse can lead to something called delusional parasite.
All right, so I mean, obviously, not a very good situation. All right, so let's talk about meth. So meth was really popular here in this area for a long time, due to the fact that it was being produced right here. So one of the things that they need in order to produce it, they need some pseudoephedrine, which is a over-the-counter medications. Once they made that hard to get, then what happened is they weren't able to actively make it any longer. It makes it a lot harder. Now we're seeing some of it coming in from Mexico now, but it's a lot more expensive and it's just not as popular as it used to be. Again, it can be swallowed, snorted, or smoked or injected. There's lots of different ways to take it. The effects can be really interesting because it gets you to the point where you can really get a lot done, and you can be full of energy. Sometimes it's called the super stimulant. Users may even binge for days without food or sleep. Meth users were so rampant that in 2004 the Drug Enforcement Administration set aside a bunch of money to try to enforce the laws for this, and so it caused lots of problems. All right. Quickly show you this video. This is called the crystal meth before and after. There's a reason why they call it the ugly drug, and because what happens to people's faces is pretty interesting. I mean, you look at the big scabs that they have on their faces. That's because they have what's called meth mites, and they start to actually pick off the skin. And what's kind of sad is that sometimes what happens is they start to think about the fact that the meth is being absorbed out their skin, and so they pick at their scabs. And some of them even eat their scabs because it has some of the meth being permeated throughout their skin. Kind of a bad deal, but you can tell not a real good look. And there's countless numbers of videos about that. Okay, the last one here is depressants. Gotta hustle. Depressants are exactly what they do. They're causing depression in the central nervous system. They're relief for tension, can lead to tolerance and addiction. and then they cause a feeling of calmness, drowsiness. Two of the types are barbiturates and benzodiazepines.